All right, as I go through this, if you guys have questions for me, let me know. I'll be happy to answer them. All right, so to start with, the red highlighted portion is contextualization. So contextualization needs to be 4 sentences. Most of you guys either totally had this or you didn't have it at all. There are very few people that struggled with this when they tried to implement it. If you did struggle, it was because there wasn't enough detail. You need to have 4 individual thoughts. Something else that some people did was they just started their argument with contextualization. So what I mean by that is they started to explain why the colonies were different, like at the very beginning of the paper. You don't do that. Instead, what you do is you set the stage by describing what's going on in the world, and then you end with your thesis. My thesis is in the black bolded print. All right. First sentence you'll see for all 3 of my argumentative paragraphs are orange. That is because they're topic sentences. They're relating back to the different portions of the thesis. And then my green highlighted portion is my intro to the documents and my summaries. One thing, there's 2 different ways you can do this. I'll explain both. The first is I just describe what the document is saying, or I just describe the source line. So I say manifest of a ship bound for Virginia shows the type of people that were heading to it, and then I do parentheses document 3. That's one way to cite. If you look down at the second paragraph, you could also just say document 1 is written by, and that's good enough for your site as well. We need to get a little bit better about citing the documents just going forward. It's just something we can do to make it slightly better. After I go through my introductions and my summaries, I then have my analysis.
I think I did it right. I just didn't turn it in.
Ethan, you were not muted. So analysis for some of you guys is just a little too short. So you want to make sure that you're going through enough detail. Some of you guys were just restating your summaries in your analysis. All right. So the last thing I kind of want to cover is just HAPs. HAPs were the things that people were missing the most of, like in terms of not attempting at all. For the HAP, you need to make sure to identify what the aspect of the document you're looking at. So I did 2. I did 1 on John Winthrop. So I say there is value added due to Winthrop because he was the governor. So that's the point of view of the author. But then you also have to explain how that adds to your argument, which means that he would have a strong say in how society would form. Big no-no for HAPs. It has nothing to do with bias or validity or anything like that. Do you guys think President Trump or President Biden really knows what you're going through on a day-to-day life? Absolutely not. Those guys are super rich and they're super powerful. So you saying because he's the governor means he has a better understanding of what's going on in the world. That's definitely not true. He probably has he probably knows less what's going on in the colony because he's a governor. So instead we want to focus on, okay, because he's the governor, what does that actually give him? It gives him power, and you want to focus on that power. My second HAP that I did was on purpose, which I know I told you guys not to do really unless you felt really confident, but this purpose was so easy. And this purpose had to do with the laws of document 4. It was a list of rules. So because they're laws, they add value because it's what's being promoted in society by the government at the time and what has to be followed. This shows that it has obvious importance to the government and society. Okay. So again, identifying the purpose and then adding to it. That's HAPs. Now, the last thing I want to show you guys before I'll just let you ask any questions you might have is there's 2 easy ways to argue this paper and get credit for the analysis. The first way is very few of you did. So that's actually why I made a second way for the perfect paper, just so you could kind of see more or less what I'm looking for. So the first way, what I do, my 3 topic sentences were, one of the ways the colonies became different were the type of people settling in there. That's demographics. Almost every single one of you guys did that because we did it in class. Then the second way I say is that the colonies were formed in different societies because of their motivation for establishing the colony. So like how I did in these first two documents with document 3 and document 2, where I showed one as Virginia's perspective or the Chesapeake perspective, and then the other as the New England perspective, I did the same thing in document 1 and document 6. I showed the New England perspective in document 1 and then the Chesapeake perspective in document 6. So I constantly went through and said, here's what the motivation was for New England. Here's what the motivation was for the Chesapeake. Most of you guys did 2 documents about the motivation for New England and 2 documents and motivation for the Chesapeake. Let me just show you kind of how those analyses might differ. So for this one, the way I did it originally, having the New England document for document 1 right here about John Winthrop, he wants unity, model Christian society, and John Smith, document 6, describing a heartless society all about gaining wealth. All I then have to do is go through and give an analysis explaining that the motivations are leading to differences in the colonies. The New England colonies are going to take better care of their poor, which creates a stronger sense of community, whereas the Chesapeake are not going to do that. All right, so obviously that makes them different. Same thing down here. I say a third way that these colonies began to form differently is their relationship with their government. I use government for document 4, those list of rules. And then I use government for document 7, which is Governor Berkeley saying he can't get anyone to even help him fight the Dutch because no one cares about him or the colony that much. So therefore I show, New England's all about unity, equality. Because of that, they're like going to be all in it together. The Chesapeake's like middle fingers to you guys. I get mine. I don't care about you. How most of you guys did it is my second example paper. All right. First paragraph's identical. Second paragraph, first argumentative paragraph, identical. But it's down here. So my first thing I do is in my topic sentence, I explain the second way that the New England colonies established themselves with ideas of unity and equality in mind, compared to the Chesapeake, which had selfish ambition and distrust with the government. Because what you're going to do, if you're arguing this way, is you're basically going to first establish what the New England colonies are, and then you're going to hit pause. Then you're going to say, now let me go describe what the Chesapeake colonies are, and then I'm going to talk about them together. Okay? So same thing goes, document 1, New England document, document 4, New England document, both in the same paragraph. Both do a good job of establishing this idea of equality, right? Strong equality in the colonies, lots of loyalty in the colonies, lots of trust. Then I just add this little sentence at the end that this is very different than the Chesapeake. I don't do any analysis yet on the Chesapeake because I haven't introduced the documents. A lot of you guys did this part. You said, this is not what the Chesapeake was like. But you never actually went back and you never told me what the Chesapeake was like. It was kind of like just leaving me in suspense. So then I come down here, my last paragraph, I say, document 6, basically it's a hellhole. Document 7, there's no loyalty. And then when I do my analysis for these documents, I make sure to refer back to the analysis previously so that now I can argue them all together. So as you can see, the Chesapeake did not have loyalty due to a massive inequality gap, which came from motivations of a lot of men coming over searching for individual wealth. That's covering documents 6 and 7. The government did not provide for those that were poor and eventually led to no support of the government in their time of need. Again, we're talking about documents 6 and 7. But now comparing that to the New England calls for equality and unity of all classes of people, which is back up here on this document, in its laws and government, it's no wonder that the societies turned out so incredibly different. So I make a reference back to these other analysis that I did up here in this, which you're allowed to do. And in fact, eventually I'm going to encourage you to do that. Think about it like a movie, all right? Like if there's a scene in a movie that happens, that scene just disappears from the movie for the rest of the time. Sometimes that scene is recalled back to as motivations for why people are doing things that they're doing. And you can do that in your paper. You can be like, hey, you remember how I told you that New England was all about equality? Well, now let me bring that back up and explain to you how they're different. These paragraphs don't have to work in complete silos to one another. And sometimes building paragraphs off of one another is the best thing to do. Now, this is for a perfect paper. If you didn't do this, but you had like good analysis through the whole thing, you would have gotten 5 points off on analysis. So I don't want you to think like, oh my God, I would have made a 70, but I would have made 100, but instead I made a 70. No, if you made a 70, I'm going right now through a perfect paper. All right. So that's like all the detail on the paper that I want to give. If you guys have questions for me right now, I can answer them. And I know some of you guys are working with like unfair advantages. Some of you guys have probably gotten your papers back if you've looked at Turnitin. And if you're in my 4th period class, you have not gotten papers back.
I have a question. I noticed you put a thesis again at the bottom of the paper. Is that required?
It's not. No, honestly, like I do that. I don't want my paper to sound stupid like when I'm presenting it to you guys. So like I've always just done this as a safety measure for like any paper that I write, that basically I just use it as like a checkpoint of making sure like why I wrote it, but it's not required. And you don't get any extra points for this. Just for me, it helps me to go back through the paper one more time and be like, okay, what did I actually write? And then I just kind of include that as my conclusion. But no, you don't need it. Any other questions?
I have a question, Mr. Murray.
Yeah.
So I forgot to turn mine in on turnitin.com.
Uh-huh.
So like, what does that mean? Like I did it at like 3 a.m. on Sunday,
Uh-huh.
but I forgot to press submit.
So we'll have to talk. Let me and you talk about that offline.
All right, cool. But like the doc is like time stamped, so it shows like when I was working on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions for me? Right now I have 100, and the average for all papers that I've graded is like a 65, which isn't too bad. There are going to be ways to earn points back on this paper, up to a 75. And the way you're actually going to do that is using this perfect paper. So I'm going to explain this in class, but if you guys want to start to like brainstorm how to do this, basically how you would earn points back on the paper is you're going to write me an additional paper on what you did wrong and how you would fix it. So I don't want you to write the paper again. I've just given you a 100 paper. That would be like the stupidest assignment ever. You could just copy and paste that in. So instead it would be like you recognizing what your mistakes were in your paper and then submitting that back to me. That will be due next Wednesday. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
So you said up to a 75. What if you have a 75 or above? Can you not?
Correct.
grade it?
Right. You, this is mainly to make sure, like, I don't want people who